It'd been raining for 2 days. They have like a false turn in. I turn in and it goes from concrete to grass. So I get my SUV stuck in the mud.
Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Today is Thursday, June 5th, and we appreciate you being here wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether it's via the podcast on the Apple Podcast or the Spotify podcast platform. Wherever you get your podcast, you can download the podcast, you subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, give us a review, all those fun stuff. All of our podcast numbers have just gone through the roof over the last few weeks, so we greatly appreciate the support that you've shown the show. We also appreciate those of you that are coming to us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. You can hit that thumbs up button. We're going to have a great show for you today, and we'll have another great show for you next week. Bunch of good content between now and when media days get kicked off with the Big 12 here about 4 or 5 weeks from now. We have an awesome show today. We have Joey McGuire, the head coach of the Texas Tech Red Raiders, will join the show. They have a ton of momentum right now in NIL. We've seen what their softball team has done the last few weeks, playing in the championship series against the Texas Longhorns. That's a fascinating thing that's gone on in Lubbock over the last several months. They have tremendous support. They have tremendous backing, and it has shown on the recruiting trail. They have revamped their roster. They're flipping their defensive personnel, and a lot of people, self-included, believe they are a real contender to not just make, but also potentially make some noise in the college football playoff this year. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the momentum they've created. Behren Morton, his health, where he's at right now, how his progress from off-season surgery is coming along, and what can be expected from the Red Raiders here in 2025. We also are going to go through a series of over-unders. We have a bunch of teams that are sitting there at 8.5 in the win totals, over-under win totals in Vegas. We're going to go through several from the Power 5, including Texas Tech, Miami, several in the ACC, including Louisville, including SMU, a bunch of teams that we'll get to today. So we'll go through that long list of teams sitting at 8.5 today and tell you, kind of going through their schedule, which way we might lean when evaluating their 2025 prospects. So let's kick things off with the head coach of Texas Tech, Joey McGuire. Well, he's entering into his 4th season. I feel like time flies, Coach. I can't believe it's year 4, but I'm also so excited about the progress and the momentum that you guys have going into the season. He's Joey McGuire. He's the head coach of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Coach, just help me understand first and foremost. I mean, the first 3 seasons have to have kind of felt like a little bit of a whirlwind, and now you kind of have your bearings and you feel like you're ready to tackle the 25 campaign. So where are we at heading into this year?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. And it's been crazy. I always tell everybody, I feel like we made a lot of progress. I love where we're at. I love our building, man. I love our team, the culture that we built. But the first couple of years, until last year, we hadn't been able to keep a quarterback healthy. We were able to keep Behren Morton healthy, and we were knocking on the door. We beat Arizona State and Iowa State, and those are the 2 teams that played in the Big 12 championship. That's great, but we weren't where we want to be. And so we went all in. We pushed all our chips in and we're very aggressive in the portal. We have a lot of really good players that we retained. And so we're really excited. We had a good spring and can't wait. We got a lot of work to do. As you know, summer's so important, but we got a lot of work to do and can't wait for the season to start.
Well, rightfully so, and we'll get into all those additions and the momentum that you guys have created in the NIL space and the support that you have from your collective. It's just remarkable. But I was committed to Texas Tech. I consider myself a big fan of the Red Raiders. I think it's a wonderful place. I think it's a culture that can be created. You got great support. But I want to start by talking about your experience as a high school coach. And I think the state of Texas, look, I'm a Texan. The state of Texas takes care of their own. There's no denying that. So knowing your history at Cedar Hill, knowing the success that you had as a high school coach, I would imagine that when you go and visit with other high school coaches around the state, you have a different level of camaraderie when trying to recruit their players. How has that experience as a high school coach benefited you now that you're taking over a Big 12 program?
It's been huge because, I was lucky enough to be at a phenomenal school Cedar Hill, but I was also on the board of directors, for the THSCA, and was really involved in that. So I know so many of these coaches. It helps a lot because we'll have guys come in, players come in that we're recruiting, and I feel really good whenever I can say, ask your head coach about me. Ask your head coach. Or there's guys on different staffs that were either on my staff or I coached. I have a ton of former players that are now high school coaches in some really big time programs. And so you're able to ask these guys like, hey, go ask this coach about, who we are and what we're about. And then I have there's six other high school coaches, former high school coaches on my staff in some capacity. And so we have a lot of connections. I mean, and some funny stories. I can get into really a funny recruiting story that can help you out as being a high school coach, if you want me to, that happened a few weeks ago. But it's a huge, I think it's a huge benefit for us for at least, a coach to be able to say, this is who they are. He is who you see every single day. And if he tells you this is how it's going to be, then that's how it's going to be. And that's helped us in recruiting a lot in the state of Texas.
Well, what you did right there, Coach, in the television business or in the podcast was you just did a tease. I feel like I need to hear this story now. I'm on the edge of my seat.
I can do it quick. I actually wasn't recruiting. I was in the part to where May I'd go out and I meet with a lot of alumni. And so I was in Austin meeting with the alumni group. I went to Dripping Springs, and then I was doing the Houston Touchdown Club the next day. And so it was easier to drive. And I'm not one of these head coaches that needs an entourage. I usually recruit by myself, which my high school counterparts always laugh at me, like, where's your entourage? Because they kind of think it's funny that these coaches show up with a bunch of different people. And so I was driving myself. I was hungry. It was about 10:30 at night. I was driving from Dripping Springs to Houston. I was hungry, so I pulled off the road at LaGrange in LaGrange, Texas, and there's a Taco Bell there. It'd been raining for 2 days. They have like a false turn in. I turn in, and it goes from concrete to grass. So I get my SUV stuck in the mud. Because it was a rental, like I'm stuck, like my cousin Vinny stuck, like they are stuck in the mud. I can't get it out. And so because it was a rental, the tow truck didn't want to do it, but because they were afraid, liability wise. And so I called Kenny Perry, who's my special teams coordinator, who was a high school coach forever. Also, he was his last one. He was the head coach at Arlington Bowie. And I said, man, I'm in LaGrange. I'm stuck in the mud. I need some help. He goes, I know the head coach at LaGrange. Give me 5 minutes. So he calls the head coach at LaGrange, high school buddies. Again, he sends a guy up that had played for him in a big, four-wheel drive truck. Within 5 minutes, they pulled me out. I go through the drive-through, get my Taco Bell, and I'm on the road to Houston. But that's what it is. You got people like that you can call and, oh, yeah, I know this high school coach, or I know this high school coach, or I know this high school coach. They can pull you out of the mud if you're stuck.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing story. The only thing that would have been more Texan about that experience was at Buc-ee's or Whataburger. But other than that, Taco Bell also good.
Well, if they'd had a Whataburger, that's where I would have been. I promise you
that. Understandable. I think part of the reason why I wanted to get into that, though, is that everyone is saying, oh, well, Texas Tech, NIL, Texas Tech, NIL, they're one of the big spenders. I still think that there's a premium on the relationship. Don't get me wrong. I know NIL helps. Like we're not ignoring that. But I think there's more to your staff than just a remarkable amount of investment from your alum. And I just want to make sure that's highlighted because I just don't feel like that's the proper story that's being told right now.
Yeah, I mean, it still goes back to that because if all things are equal, if you're competing against whoever you're competing against and they, I mean, let's be honest, the guys that we're trying to compete against are their NIL's working at the highest level also. And so you're still trying to make sure that you can develop that relationship and make sure that these guys come on campus, believe in what you're going through. And it does help. I mean, it helps tremendously. I'll give you an example. It was a couple of years ago, but we were afraid we weren't going to Katie, hate to bring up Katie, but Katie was deep into the playoffs And we're afraid we were not going to get this kid on an official visit. And Gary Joseph said, Coach, if it doesn't work out, you need to understand I'm still going to have your back. Yeah. I know it would be good for my player to come to Texas Tech. And we ended up getting that young man because of that relationship. Guys that I have committed to right now in the 2026 class, I can't talk about, but it's awesome that I coached a secondary coach at Cedar Hill. He was on my state championship in 2006. He's coaching a kid that's committed to us. So he's able to say to the mom and dad, look, this guy right here is a huge part of my life. He's going to take care of your son. And at the end of the day, I know the NIL has a lot to do with it, but the relationship piece to where parents know that you're going to take care of their son still has a huge part of what we're doing.
No, I love to hear that. And look, I think, especially when you recruit to the high school kids in Texas, look, it's a wealthy state. It's a state in which guys are developed at an early age in an effort to go and chase championships. We did it at Southlake. They do it at Katy. They do it at Smithson Valley, Cedar Hill, you name it. So you got to make sure you choose the right guy. So as you can kind of go out now, knowing that you have the investment that you have and being able to go and get pretty much whoever you want or be in the mix for whoever you want, how do you make sure you take the guys that still have tremendous upside that maybe haven't been developed quite as much as some of the guys that you might see at some of the bigger programs in high school?
Yeah, it's a great mix. That's a great question because, if you play at South Lake Carroll, if you play at Katy, we have kids. I actually have a couple of coaches that played at South Lake Carroll that play for me that I recruited that played at Baylor. But we have a couple of Katy kids. Like one, coming from that program, the one thing you do know, they are developed, but this is the one thing they love football.
Yeah.
You can't walk through those doors and understand the expectations and the level that you're going to play at and practice at every single day and not love football. So one of the questions that we're always asking is, do they love football? Because this. I mean, you've done it. It is hard to do what we're doing, and it's hard to do and move even to the next level if you don't love football. So we always look at that. And then we believe in our evaluations, and we trust our evaluations. And we're looking for guys that we can develop. We're looking for length. We're looking for speed. And we're looking for guys that love football. And so going into those, whether we're going into East Texas, into some smaller schools and recruiting, different guys, or where we're going into Houston or wherever we're going in, there's still those boxes that you have to check and that we're searching to get the right answers, not just answers that anybody's going to give you, but whether you're talking to the lunch lady and how they interact with those, or the counselor, or just different people that are in their building to get the real answers. It's got to match up, and we need developmental traits, and then we also want to see it on film. And so those things like that, we go through, and then you got to trust your eval. Like there's going to be some really guys, I've seen guys that they got a 4th star when they were maybe a freshman, because as my old player, Ben Molina, that played at A&M and played for the Cowboys, used to say, Coach, that's the underwear Olympics when you go to all these camps and everything, right? And then all of a sudden you put pads on. You've got to trust that maybe that kid that was a 4-star and other people were recruiting, they don't fit in necessarily what we're recruiting or how we're recruiting. And so that you really have to stick to your guns and go through the process of what you believe recruiting-wise.
Well, one area where I know you guys have really attacked is along the defensive front. New defensive coordinator, Coach Wood, coming in, trying to kind of flip that group and kind of figuring out maybe ways to defend the pass, things of that nature, rush the passer, all those things are so beneficial. How much have your expectations changed now after having gone through spring with some of your new personnel and seeing how things are being directed under Coach Wood?
Now, I'm excited about Coach Wood. He was exactly what I was hoping for from the standpoint. He's very organized. He is very A to B to C to D. He's got a really good plan. And then we were very aggressive. I mean, we brought in 5 transfer guys out of the portal between David Bailey, Romello Height on the edges, Lee Hunter, A.J. Holmes, and Skylar Gill Howard. interior to go along with the guys that we had. I mean, we have a lot of guys that played last year that were young that are now, maybe they started some games that are in a rotation as number two. The depth in the D line, and then the ability in the D line, like the athletic ability, we really are. I mean, it's not me saying it. It's easy for me to say it, but like you ask NFL scouts, if you ask different people in the country that are in your world, we have one of the best and one of the deepest defensive lines in any conference at any school. We really do. And the production, when you're talking about the 5 guys that we brought in, and then you add Duda Banks, who played for us and had a season-ending injury against Baylor, Jaden Cofield, Amir Washington, Braylon Rigsby. When you add all those guys back in, I think you probably have the most production returning in the nation whenever it comes to the defensive line.
It'd be hard pressed to push back on that. Now, I don't have a list of defensive lines in front of me, but I just look at the actual acquisition, the veteran leadership, the guys that have played, the guys that have been productive. It'd be hard to look at the group that's going to look more different and better, more improved than where you guys were last year. Another thing that I'm real curious about, I think everyone reading Texas Tech is Behren Morton and where he's at from a recovery standpoint. He's had the shoulder injury. I know he got that fixed, but I know that there hasn't been really an opportunity for him to really get out there, but it sounds like there's been a lot of progress made. Yeah. And I know we're hoping that he's going to be able to be protected a little better maybe this year than he has been in years past. So where's Behren at right now as far as his recovery, and what can we expect from him this season?
Yeah, you probably saw a big smile on my face as soon as you said Behren Morton. Man, that's my dude, man. I love that kid. He's a coach's kid. He's tough. He loves football. He loves Texas Tech. I mean, in the world that we live in right now, he started and he is finishing at the same school, just like you did, and his backup, I believe, is going to do the same thing. Will Hammond, he's going to start at Texas Tech and he's going to finish at Texas Tech. Behren feels great. We had our first football school yesterday. He's still on a pitch count, and we just drive that pitch count up on his throwing days. But he, like yesterday, his pitch count was at 75 balls. He can throw every ball, but we're not going over 75. And man, he feels really, really good. And he's I think one thing that he's really excited about, he hasn't felt this good since like his freshman year when he first got here, and it's not just his shoulder, it's like his whole body. Yeah. We really bulked him up last year because we wanted to keep him healthy. And so he probably played like at 223 last year. He's at 213 right now. He looks different, and he feels really, really good. And he's playing with a chip on his shoulder. I mean, he hears all the things that are being said. The kid at Arizona State, absolutely incredible. Sam's incredible. They're talking about him. They're talking about Josh at TCU. They're talking about Sawyer at Baylor. And Beren's kind of the afterthought, but you look statistically at what he did last year, I think 27 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, and the yardage, I mean, he's right up there with all those guys that you're talking about. So Behren functions really well like that, like this chip on his shoulder. And so I think it's really driving him. And then he is having a lot of fun because he has some really, really good guys around him. Added the offensive line, and retained. I mean, we retained one of the best receivers in the country in Caleb Douglas. I mean, there's a lot of people that are talking about a lot of other receivers, but that dude, he had 5 100-yard games in the Big 12. You can see I'm a numbers guy, so that's why I can, I really am. We're a big analytics group, so we talk about that all the time. And so he's really excited about, what's going on in the building.
I think he should be, and I'm excited for him. And nobody likes to see a comeback story better than me. So I think we're all rooting for him as college football fans this year. The Big 12 has long been classified as like a league of the quarterback, right? Yeah. I mean, I think it's changed. I think it's become a lot more line of scrimmage than people want to acknowledge. But let's be real. It's 2025 in college football. Like, you can't win without one. So if you look at the quarterbacks in the league, just kind of across the board, Houston's got one. You mentioned Sam Leavitt. I think Barron's going to have a great year. Kansas has a guy that's shown some amazing moments. I know I'm probably forgetting 7 or 8 guys that are also capable of playing at a high level. But where do you think the league is today compared to where it was, say, 10 years ago with the Patrick Mahomes of the world when it was, hey, race to 50, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's totally changed. Like, I remember whenever I stayed at Baylor in 2020, and Coach Aranda, one of the best defensive minds in the country, he's talking about the change. And I think some of the change happened when you had Coach Campbell go to Iowa State and the style that they play. When Matt Rule got the Baylor job and the style that they played, and so it's a lot more a line of scrimmage. You think about the running backs that were drafted this last year out of the Big 12. It was a really running back driven league. K-State had a kid drafted. We had a kid drafted. UCF had a kid drafted. I know I'm going to miss somebody, but you had Arizona State. You had Scatteraboo drafted, and so it is a really different league. And then I think because you have some defensive head coaches, the league's changed. So when you go back and you think about the Red Raiders, you think about Baylor with Coach Browse, it was, hey, let's get a couple of stops a half and we're going to outscore people. It's an entirely different league than what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, still, I think, though, top to bottom, about as entertaining as it gets. I mean, the margins across the board are just razor thin. And we've seen that last year. I mean, I think Kansas last year had like 4 or 5 games in which they lost by 7 points or less. I mean, it's just absurd. So when you're prepping for the season, how much do you have to focus in your league more than maybe any other on winning the margins? The red zone, the third down, the special teams play, the hidden yardage. Do you put a different emphasis on that because the personnel gap between the teams might not be quite as much as it is in other leagues?
For us, just with the guy that I was raised with starting out in football, Robert Woods, who was, I worked for him for 9 years, the most detailed coach I've ever seen in my life. Quick story about him. 1990, Wilmer Hutchins beat Austin Westlake. He was the head coach at Wilmer Hutchins. He called every offensive play and every defensive call. He was the head coach and the OC and the DC. I've never been around a guy like him. And then moving to Matt Rule and moving to Dave Aranda, these guys, they were so situational football driven.
Yeah.
And so when you come to our practices, you're going to have a little bit of normal down and distance on certain days, but we are our plan to win is part of it is attack the situations. And it is so third down driven. Red zone driven. We have a magic number period, because we're we are very aggressive on fourth down. So we'll have a third down period to where, maybe it's 3rd and 12. And if you get to 4th and 5, then you're going for it, and there's always a winner and a loser in all these situations. And the loser has to run and the coaches that are on the losing side have to run a gasser at the end of practice. And I have to run every time because I can't pick a side. So, as the head coach, but we are very situation driven. One, that's where you're going to win games and lose games. But in this league, you better be really good in like you said, those little bitty areas to where you're going to, because every game's so competitive. I think there was 9 teams, maybe more, but I think there was 9 teams at the end of the year that were still the last couple games in the fight to get into the Big 12 championship. And so, like you said, it's a little bit different. Now, saying that, I do believe NIL is going to create more and more and more parity in college football. I think you saw that in the SEC this year, to where there were some teams that, they just how did that team beat this team? I think you're going to see that more. I think it's good for college football. It's definitely good for us in the Big 12. And so I think you're going to see that more and more, but that's how it's been. I've been in this league for 8 years. I guarantee the last 4 years, that's exactly how this league's been played.
Yeah, it feels like we're moving more and more towards like the NFL age-old adage of, hey, it's an 8-8 league. It feels like It kind of feels like everyone's heading that way. So you're 100% right. Last one or two before we get you out of here, Coach. You've been so generous with your time. You have tremendous momentum on the NIL front. I think your softball program, by the way, I know you're so proud of what's going on there. But it's proof of concept a little bit. If you invest, look at the results. And I feel like you can kind of utilize the success of the softball program and apply it to Texas Tech football. So how do they kind of go hand in hand? How does it signify maybe what the future might look like for Texas Tech athletics?
Well, the one thing I tell everybody, people ask me, and I was like, okay, like if you're playing Texas Hold'em and you went all in, we have a $250 million new football facility between the South End Zone and the Womble Football Center. It's 166,000 square feet of football facility that is totally built for the player. And so you start checking off or eliminate, like, okay, a recruit comes in. I think it's the best facility in the country. And as a high school coach for 23 years, I've seen a lot of the facilities around the country. And so you check that off, that like you're walking in and you're like, they have everything I need to reach my goal. And then the financial investment, whenever it comes to NIL, you're checking that off. Like it's not going to be a reason we lose a player because we're not going to be able to, pay that player at that amount NIL wise. And so you check that off. So now it goes back to what you and I talked about before, relationships and development. And the people that invested in the softball program, one of the big one is John and Tracy Sellers, and he is business partners with Cody Campbell, who is the head of our NIL, the Matador Club. The Double Eagle is their company, and those guys have gotten behind football at a whole nother level. And there's no excuses. Like honestly, between recruiting the high school kids and the recruiting out of the portal, adding the two coordinators, adding what we add, it's time for us to go win. I understand the gravity of this season. I'm fired up for it. I can't wait. Expectations are good. That's the programs you want to be a part of. That, man. Like you think about the programs you played for. You expected to walk in and dye your hair blonde and win a state championship. And then you turn around and you went to Alabama and it was the exact same. So you lived that every single day. You'd rather be in that world than be in the world of like, man, I hope we get lucky. Or, I hope maybe if somebody else doesn't do what they're supposed to do, maybe we can squeeze in the back door. Man, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that has the expectations. And that's what we have right now. And the softball has the same thing. When you go get the best player in the country and she's generational talent, and she is, then that's exactly where they are. And we're going to try to do the same thing.
Well, expectations and pressure are privilege. We used to always say that. Coach, this has been tremendous. And I couldn't be more excited about what Texas Tech has a chance to do this year. I think you got everything in front of you, and I'm excited to see what you guys do with it, man.
Well, I appreciate you. And I can't thank you enough for having me, man. I'm always in. So if you ever want any scoop of what's going on, man, I really am, because I have a huge respect for you. Number one, who you played for. Todd Dodge is one of my favorite people in the entire world. Riley is a very close friend. You're a Texas high school football player, and, man, I'm all about that. So if you ever need anything from me, man, I'm all in.
I appreciate it, Coach. If you get stuck in the mud here in Birmingham, Alabama, I'll come get you out whenever you need, bud. Appreciate you again.
Brother. Appreciate you. Wreck 'em.
All right, great conversation there. And we figured we'd take that discussion and kind of spin it into looking ahead a little bit. We have a bunch of Vegas win totals. We've been doing this over the last few weeks, kind of looking at some team schedules, looking at where Vegas has them currently pegged, and kind of give you a sense of some games that they absolutely have to win if they're going to eclipse that win total that Vegas has posted at this point. We, of course, will go throughout today and acknowledge teams that are all sitting at 8.5. And there's a bunch of them, especially in the Big 12, where it's about as wide open as it possibly gets. So, considering we just had our conversation with Joey McGuire, let's dive in and start with the Texas Tech Red Raiders. A lot of people feel really optimistic about Texas Tech. I do as well. They might be my team to beat here in the Big 12. It's early, not locking it in just yet, but based on the improvements the roster's had year over year, some of the assumptions I'm willing to make about guys staying healthy, I feel really good about where things stand for the Red Raiders this year. The non-conference, very gettable. Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, and Oregon State, those would be the first 3 weeks of the season. If that game was in Corvallis, I think it'd be a little tougher. But the fact that that game's played in Lubbock makes me feel a lot better about the Red Raiders being able to secure that one. Now, Big 12 gets underway in a big way when they go on the road to Utah on September 20th. That's the opener. That's one that I have a lot of questions about. I think they can get it for sure, but Utah is a huge question mark throughout the Big 12 this year. It's always a tough place to play. We know that. Playing at altitude is going to be tough. We get it. Texas Tech will be battle-tested, but at Utah, that's a circle game that put that one kind of in the toss-up category at the moment. They'll get a bye week the following week before they go to Houston. Houston, I think, will be better, but still in a little bit of a rebuild mode in year number 2 under Willie Fritz, before Kansas comes to Lubbock on homecoming on October 11th. That's one they absolutely have to get, because it gets very difficult after that game against the Kansas Jayhawks, who I think will also be improved. Lost a lot of close games last year. I think they'll be better this upcoming year. They go to the defending champs, Arizona State, on October 18th. Massive game. Oklahoma State, who I think is going to be quite a bit better than last year. They can't get much worse. They come to Lubbock before they go to Kansas State on November 1st. And then on November 8th, they'll host BYU. So in that 4-game stretch, I think that could very easily define the season for the Red Raiders. At Arizona State, Oklahoma State at home, at Kansas State, and then BYU at home. Those are the 4 toughest games. I think that sandwich game of Oklahoma State, be very, very careful, even though it's at home, before finishing up 2 of the last 3 weeks against UCF at home, before traveling to West Virginia and in Morgantown there on November 29th. They have a bye week the week between the two, so they'll be able to regroup just a little bit. But I think it's a really interesting schedule. I think it's a gettable schedule for Texas Tech. Right now, I think Texas Tech's a 9-win football team. I really believe that if they can stay healthy, I feel really good about the progress that's been made on both lines of scrimmage and some of the additions that they've made in the transfer portal. So assuming chemistry can be created in a fairly short period of time with all those new arrivals, I think Texas Tech is poised to have an outstanding season. We'll go next to the Arizona State Sun Devils. 8.5 is the win total. Very difficult schedule in my eyes this year for Arizona State. The non-conference, there is one very difficult test, I think, for the Sun Devils. Northern Arizona is not that. Texas State is not that. But at Mississippi State on September 6th, that will be a very tricky spot. Now, Mississippi State struggled defensively. Arizona State has a better roster on paper for sure, but that's a long road trip. That's a unique road trip, and one in which the Sun Devils better be ready to play. The Davis Wade is not an easy place to play, and they'll find out very quickly just where they stand there in week number 2. The conference games also very difficult. I look at just some of these games that are on the road. Then you have a couple short weeks. It gets tricky in a hurry. They'll go to Baylor to open up Big 12 play before coming home to play against TCU, but that game's on a Friday. So at Baylor, a team that I think is a player in the Big 12, against TCU, who I also think is a player in the Big 12 in the span of 6 days. Extremely tough stretch there for the Sun Devils. Then they'll go to Utah on October 11th after the bye week. Texas Tech comes to them on the 18th. Houston also comes to them. But my goodness, those first 4 games in the Big 12 slate with a bye week in the middle is extremely difficult for Arizona State. At Baylor, TCU, bye week. At Utah, tough road trip before returning home to take on the Red Raiders, who I think might have the most well-rounded roster outside of potentially Arizona State coming into this year. Then you're at Iowa State. You have West Virginia at home, at Colorado, and then the Territorial Cup there on the final Friday of the college football season. I think it's going to be very tough for Arizona State to replicate the same level of success that we saw a year ago. I think they can get to 9, but my goodness, man, that 8.5 number is right on it. And I tell you what, some of those road games, it's hard for me to feel super confident about the over. I would take it though anyways, because I think in this league, if you have an elite quarterback, and believe me, for those of you that have listened to this show for the last few months, I believe that Arizona State has an elite quarterback and potentially a super elite quarterback if he develops the way I think he can develop this year. Sam Leavitt is the key to Arizona State kind of reimagining things and doing things again with everybody having circled them and putting the target on their chest. So I like Arizona State a lot this year, but my goodness, the schedule is extremely difficult. We'll go next to BYU, who currently sits at 8.5 as well. Now, hey, very interesting first couple years in the Big 12. Now entering year 3, they kind of have a good feel for where the things are, where the gauntlet may be. I think they're well equipped because of their physicality, their depth, their maturity. BYU's always going to be a problem. I always believe that. I always respect this program. I love Kalani Sitake. I like their personnel. I think they can defend. I love what they do on all three levels defensively. And I think offensively, they've made enough progress to make me think if a game becomes a shootout for whatever reason, their defense doesn't have their best stuff one day, they can score with just about anybody in the league. The non-conference is always really interesting. They got Portland State, Stanford, but the one that I'm interested in is actually the road trip on September 20th, all the way to Greenville, North Carolina, to take on East Carolina, the Pirates. That's a really long way to travel. BYU is no stranger to difficult road games. When they were not in a conference, they had games like this all the time, but that's a long way to go. And Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium there in Greenville is a very tough road environment. That'll be an athletic team that will challenge them in a lot of ways. I would still lean towards BYU in that matchup. Let's get to the Big 12 conference games, the 9 games that they have. They're at Colorado. They'll be more equipped to be able to handle some of the altitude that you would face when playing at Folsom Field. I don't think that'll be one that'll be challenging for BYU. I think Colorado will have an athletic advantage in some spots. But for the most part, I think BYU will be able to handle that one. Friday, October 3rd, they'll take on West Virginia. That'll be at Lavelle Edwards. So I lean towards BYU there. At Arizona, that's a game they should win. Utah, we know BYU-Utah, the annual game. That's actually homecoming, ironically enough. That'll be an interesting one for sure. But I would lean BYU with it being in Lavelle Edwards Stadium there in Provo. At Iowa State, very tough to rebound from that game. You take on Utah, emotional game. I think that at Iowa State game might be one of the toughest games on the schedule there for BYU. They'll get a bye week there, a much needed bye, a well-deserved bye week at that point on November 1st before going to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech. Also an extremely difficult game. TCU comes to them. They're at Cincinnati, and then they have UCF at home. I really like the over for BYU this year. I think this is a really talented football team. I think defensively, they'll be in every single game. And offensively, I would anticipate that group taking the collective step forward here in year number 3 in the Big 12. Let's go on next to a team that's always at the top of the list in the Big 12 standings. That's Kansas State, who comes in with another 8.5. Look, really exciting and interesting schedule, probably the most interesting schedule in college football. They have the 3 bye weeks, which is something to make note of for sure. They will kick things off on August 23rd against Iowa State. That will be in Dublin, Ireland. That's the Aer Lingus College Football Classic, but it is also a Big 12 conference game. So because it's all the way in Dublin, it feels a little obscure, but that's one that absolutely has to be won. Of course, neutral site, big game, conference title game involving 2 teams that have aspirations of winning the Big 12 outright this year. So they'll play that one. They'll come back on the 30th on August to take on North Dakota, which will be tough. That'll be at home, but North Dakota is a solid football team. September 6th, they play Army, a very difficult team to play against, as we all know. And then at Arizona, a non-conference game. Now, this is a non-conference, is fulfilling a pre-existing agreement before Arizona joined the Big 12. So they'll get their feet wet in the Big 12 against a Big 12 opponent, but it will not count towards conference standings. Then they get their first of 3 byes on September 20th. So they will play 4 games out of the gate, 1 on week 0, finishing up on September 12th against Arizona in a non-conference game, and then they get that first bye week. So those 3 bye weeks, really, really important for this team, and they'll have 2 between September 27th and November 29th, which should be helpful for them to kind of regroup and get things back on track in the event in which they're not playing well in one facet of their team. UCF at home at Baylor. That at Baylor game, very difficult game. I like Baylor a lot this year. TCU then comes to Manhattan on October 11th. That'll be the homecoming matchup there against the Horned Frogs. Another bye. Then they're at Kansas in the Sunflower Showdown. That'll be a tough spot to go into. They're in Kansas Memorial Stadium in Lawrence. They'll have Texas Tech at home, at Oklahoma State, at Utah, and then against Colorado there to finish up the regular season. I think it's one of the toughest schedules that you'll find in the entire Big 12. I really like Kansas State. I like their personnel. I like their culture. I like the progress that's hopefully going to be had from last year to this year. But the schedule concerns me. And starting in Dublin, the way they're starting, the way their buys kind of set up, and some of those road trips that they have, I'm worried a little bit about them really being able to contend at the top of the Big 12 this year. The schedule is just daunting, and I think it could take its toll by the time we get to the season's end on November 29th. Moving over to the Southeastern Conference, the Ole Miss Rebels sit there at 8.5, and I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding Ole Miss last year. I think most will look at their roster top to bottom and think probably not going to be quite as good as it was a year ago, maybe not as star-studded as it was a year ago. But I think you'll find that offensively, I don't anticipate them missing much from what they had last year. I loved their personnel offensively last year. I just think offensively, it might dip, but it's going to be a slight dip at the most, and it might actually be improved in some spots compared to where they were last year. Now, at quarterback, I think Austin Simmons got a chance to be really, really good. Will he be as good or as impactful with his legs as Jackson Dart was? Maybe, maybe not. But offensively, I think they'll be fine. Defensively is where I have more of my concerns for Ole Miss. That group, top to bottom, all three levels, they were outstanding across the board last year, and they have to replace so many key pieces along the defensive line, including 2 defensive ends and 2 highly impactful defensive tackles with Walter Nolan and J.J. McGee. So I look at their defense. I think there's going to be a regression there on that side of the ball, and that's not ideal given some of the teams they're going to have to face. The non-conference is a little bit interesting. They'll play Georgia State, Tulane, who I really like. I always like Tulane. That'll be on September 20th. They have one of those non-conference schedules that's kind of scattered throughout. It's not like they have 3 or 4 non-conference games in a row before they start the bulk of their conference schedule. It's scattered throughout. So August 30th, they have Georgia State. September 20th, they have Tulane. October 11th, they'll play against Washington State. And then on November 8th, they'll play against the Citadel. I feel obviously good about them winning against Georgia State and against the Citadel, but Tulane and Washington State will be tough games, but they are both in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. I think they get those. I'd be surprised if Ole Miss is not 4-0 in the non-conference, but the conference play is a little bit interesting as well. They'll start the season by going to Kentucky. It's a revamped Kentucky team, a team that got Ole Miss last year. I would imagine that one will be circled for the Rebs on September 6th. And they'll have Arkansas that comes to them. That's a game that they should win. LSU is a game that they should also be very competitive in. Remember last year, they went to Baton Rouge and came up a little bit short, but they had about 6 or 7 different ways in which they could win that game, and they just couldn't make the play necessary to secure victory there in Death Valley. But they'll now get the chance in their own backyard in the rivalry game against LSU. We'll see if they can manage that. October 18th, after a long stretch of not playing SEC competition, they'll go to Sanford Stadium and take on the Georgia Bulldogs. Very difficult road trip, followed the following week at Oklahoma. Those are 2 teams that I do not want to play in back-to-back. Those are very, very difficult road trips back-to-back at Georgia, at Oklahoma. 2 of the best defenses in the entire SEC. So Austin Simmons and that offense, they'll have their hands full on October 18th, October 25th, before finally coming home and having to take on Dylan Stewart and the South Carolina Gamecocks. That'll be a very tough 3-game stretch between October 18th and November 1st. They'll have Florida come to them on November 15th. That game, I would imagine, will be circled, given that Florida knocked off the Rebs last year and kept them out of the college football playoff. They'll get a much-needed bye on the 22nd before finishing up in the Egg Bowl at Mississippi State this year. I look at the schedule, and I think the first half is somewhat manageable. And then it has a really, really tough middle stretch. And then on the back half, you get a little relief with Mississippi State being a little bit down right now, especially on the defense side of the football. But I think this season is really going to kind of come down to whether or not they can win against LSU at home. They can win against South Carolina at home. If they get those 2 wins, they should be in great shape to contend yet again as a possible at-large college football playoff contender. Moving next to the LSU Tigers. That's a team that I have really high expectations for. My expectations for LSU are probably a little higher than what most people have coming into the year. They're sitting at 8.5, and their non-conference is interesting, like it always seems to be. On August 30th, they might have the game of the weekend. That is at Clemson. That'll be in Death Valley, but not the Death Valley in Louisiana. That'll be in Clemson, South Carolina. I think a marquee opener there on Saturday night against 2 of the best teams in the country. I think both these teams will come into the season and should come into the season ranked in the top 10 to 12. I'd be surprised if Clemson's not in the top 5 in the preseason, but it all kind of depends on where LSU is. So if they can go on the road and steal one in week 1, that would be enormous. towards getting them towards that 9-win number that you would need to cash that over ticket. Then you have a couple games in the non-conference that should be relatively manageable. Louisiana Tech and against Southeastern Louisiana. On November 22nd, they'll also play Western Kentucky, but they'll obviously be a well-oiled machine by that point. Their conference schedule is as follows. September 13th, we're going to find out all we need to know. Early rivalry game at home against the Florida Gators. I think Florida's going to be quite good. Now, will Florida's record reflect that? I don't know. But on September 13th, that's a team that finished really strong down the stretch last year. If they can carry over some of that momentum that they had at the end of the 24 campaign into the beginning of the 25 campaign, Florida will be a very tough out, but it is beneficial. It will be in the friendly confines of Tiger Stadium. On September 27th, they'll go to Ole Miss. The Magnolia Bowl rivalry game on the road. You know Ole Miss is going to want that one for sure. So if they can go and steal one from Ole Miss early in the year there in September, that would be big because they get that bye week, a much needed bye week on October 4th. But that first stretch with Florida against Clemson and then at Ole Miss, that's a very tough stretch there in the month of September. They'll have South Carolina that comes to them before they go to Vanderbilt, and then A&M comes to them. So those are 3 games. I think be surprised. Those are 3 that they probably should win, knowing their 2 tough games are all at home and they have to go to Vanderbilt. But at that point, we'll see where Vanderbilt is. I think Vanderbilt's a solid football team, but I would think LSU would have a pretty considerable advantage in the stands when they go to Nashville. They'll get that bye week, the traditional bye week on November 1st before they go on the road to Bryant-Denny to take on the Crimson Tide. Massive game, annual rivalry game. We know it's a big one. That one's always one of the most hotly contested, most vicious rivalries that you'll find in college football. They were on the losing end last year in pretty significant fashion. Can they get revenge by going to Tuscaloosa and putting their best foot forward? They'll have the Battle of the Boot against Arkansas at home this year before finishing on the road at Oklahoma on November 29th. That game on November 29th, LSU at Oklahoma, that might be one of the best games on the SEC calendar right now. Now, not a lot of people are looking at Oklahoma and thinking they're an SEC contender. I think they are. I obviously think LSU is as well. That game could mean an awful lot. So circle that one. On November 29th, LSU at Oklahoma. That one could potentially decide whether or not one of those 2 teams might represent in the SEC championship game. We will see. But it's a very tough schedule for LSU, but I think they're going to be excellent. I think they'll be able to handle a lot of those difficult games that we just went through. Moving on to the Tennessee Volunteers now, 8.5 the win total for them. It's going to be a very interesting year for Tennessee. Look, there are questions, but there is tremendous upside too with some of the young players that they're expecting to step right in. Assuming the offensive line, for example, with multiple 5-star recruits, those guys can step in as true freshmen and be difference makers. That's massive. Maybe Joey Aguilar. He finally gets back to playing the way he did 2 years ago, and he has maybe an all-SEC type of season with the type of offense he runs. The defense, even though they lose some star power, maybe there's not much drop-off there. There's a lot of question marks, and I think the schedule is extremely interesting. One of the games that I find really intriguing, by the way, is that first game against Syracuse. Now, remember, Syracuse won 10 games last year. I don't think people want to pay attention to that as much as they probably should be, and Syracuse will look a little different. They're going to have a lot of new guys playing, a lot of different playmakers, a few new faces on defense, but that's an interesting game, but one I think Tennessee should win. But that athletic kickoff game in Atlanta there on August 30th at noon will be a good indicator of exactly where Tennessee's at. And you look at the rest of their non-conference, East Tennessee State and UAB, they should handle those. So I look at it, I'd be surprised if they're not 3-0 in their first 3 non-conference games, and then they have New Mexico State there at the end of the year on November 13th. But it's the conference schedule where things get very, very intriguing. They will host Georgia on September 13th. Finding out where you're at against a perennial best team in the league is always a tricky spot to be in. You will be battle tested. I think Syracuse will provide that for you. And getting Georgia at home is also massive, but the last couple years against the Bulldogs haven't been great for the Tennessee Volunteers. And I don't know if this year's roster for Tennessee is what it was the last 2 years. Like I said, big question marks and a few holes that need to be plugged. But like I said, a lot of talent that is plugging into those holes in a few different places. And they go to Mississippi State, a game that they absolutely have to win if they're expecting to get to 9 wins yet again. They have Arkansas at home, probably a little bit of revenge that's on the mind in the front of Tennessee faithful before on the 3rd Saturday of October, they head to Alabama to take on the Crimson Tide. That'll be in Bryant-Denny. That's one that I think Alabama probably has circled, and one that will be tough for sure for Tennessee, but one that they've been able to win 2 of the last 3. Maybe they can go on the road and get it done in Tuscaloosa. I'd lean towards the Tide, though, right now at this point. And they're at Kentucky, a game I would lean Tennessee in, and then Oklahoma comes to them. So I like this setup right here, by the way. You get at Kentucky, then you have Oklahoma at home. Oklahoma is, I think, a real player in the SEC this year. Traveling to Knoxville will be a very difficult task for the Sooners, and hopefully by that point, Tennessee will be a well-oiled machine. They'll go to Florida on November 22nd before finishing up at home against Vanderbilt. I think the schedule's manageable, but it's really going to kind of come down to whether or not they can win all their games on the road that they're supposed to win, at Kentucky, at Mississippi State. I think even at Florida is one that you could probably say, hey, that's one that I think we can get for sure. But then maybe pulling off an upset or 2 in there would be massive as well, whether that's Georgia at home, at Alabama, against Oklahoma at home. So that'll be really interesting to kind of see exactly where things fall. I think Tennessee is actually going to be pretty good. When you look at their schedule, I think it's a manageable schedule. I know it's the SEC. I know they're always tough. But I actually think it is a more manageable schedule than I originally thought when looking at it and going through line by line for the Volunteers. Move next to the SMU Mustangs, one of the darlings of the 2024 season, a playoff team a year ago, number set at 8.5 in their second full season as a member of the ACC. Kind of an interesting schedule when you look at it. They have Baylor in the non-conference and they're at TCU in the non-conference. If they can win both those games, they'll be in a really good spot. Baylor is at home there, and then you have at TCU, that'll be in Fort Worth. That's the Battle of the Iron Skillet. I think one of the more underrated rivalries in all of college football, one that not enough people talk about, but one that's become pretty contentious of late with Sonny Dykes going to TCU and all the other aspects of that rivalry game becoming very interesting. So if they can go 4-0 in the non-conference, I like their chances because the ACC schedule is, I think, quite a bit more difficult than it was a year ago. You get Syracuse at home, you got Stanford at home. 2 games that I think can be won by SMU. Then you go to Clemson. That's a game where I'd lean Clemson. They're on the road on October 18th. They're in Clemson, South Carolina. They're at Wake Forest, another game I think they should win before Miami comes to them on November 1st. That'll be homecoming, probably the biggest game on the home slate there for the SMU Mustangs. They'll go to Boston College. Be careful there. Might be cold up there in Chestnut Hill on November 8th. They get the bye week. Louisville is then at home. And then they'll go to Cal to finish up the regular season. Unlike last year, SMU gets the big boys in the ACC this year. At Clemson, Miami at home, and Louisville at home. I think those 3 teams right now are a cut above just about everybody else. You avoid Georgia Tech and you avoid a couple other possible slip-ups. But I think you get the 3 toughest teams in the ACC. So I'm expecting a slight regression from SMU here this year as far as their win-loss record is concerned. Moving over to the Louisville Cardinals, and I feel like no one's talking about Louisville this year. No one is talking, but they've made great additions in the portal. They have an elite running back. They have really solid nucleus of wide receivers returning. You still have a lot of talent on defense. Louisville is being slept on almost universally, and it's time to start paying attention. They're at 8.5 coming into the season, and if you look at what Coach Jeff Brom has done over the last few years, man, I'd be surprised if they're not highly competitive yet again. Interesting Friday game against James Madison at home. That's going to be an interesting one. You also get Eastern Kentucky to start the regular season. You get Bowling Green, and then the final weekend of the regular season, you play against Kentucky. So those are your 4 non-conference games. If you can go 4-0, you got to feel pretty good about where Louisville will potentially sit. And then you go through their schedule, and I think it's for the most part kind of manageable. All things considered, okay, at Pitt, that's a game I think Louisville should be able to win. Virginia's at home. They're at Miami. That's on a Friday, October 17th. Keep that one circled. Very difficult game that might decide one of those 2 teams might be playing in the ACC championship game. The winner of that game might be the one that has a little bit of a leg up. You got Boston College at home at Virginia Tech. Be careful there on November 1st. You got Cal at home, and then Clemson comes to you. That game is also on a Friday. That's November 14th. Before going to SMU there on November 22nd. Get an extra day's rest after the Clemson game. That'll be a physical war between them and the Clemson Tigers before finishing up at SMU. Right now, like I said, tough schedule at SMU, Clemson at home, at Miami. You play 2 of the 3 best teams in the league last year on the road. But I think SMU might take a slight step back. I think that's one that Louisville can get And then I think it's a toss-up. They get a split between Miami and Clemson. You got to feel really good about where they're at. But the other teams that they're playing all are around 500 football teams. So I think Louisville should be in a pretty good spot heading into this upcoming season. We'll move next to the Miami Hurricanes, who I think when you look at their schedule and their non-conference schedule, it's extremely intriguing. They will play Notre Dame on Sunday, August 31st, a massive season opener, home opener, Sunday night, standalone window. Everybody will be watching that matchup between the Irish coming off a national championship appearance, and then Miami, a team that was just on the outside looking in of the college football playoff last year. Should be two teams that are ranked in the top 10 to 12. I'd be surprised if that's not one of the biggest games of week one on the schedule. Bethune-Cookman and South Florida. Be careful with South Florida. That's an athletic team that can score some points. If that Miami defense, that new look Miami defense, isn't quite rolling the way you want them to be rolling, that could be a tricky challenge there on September 13th. But I do think Miami will be just fine for that game before welcoming the Florida Gators in the Sunshine State Showdown there on September 20th. They'll get that bye, much needed bye on September 27th. Two of those first four games, man, very, very difficult there to start the season before they get into the ACC conference slate. They're at Florida State, and right now, I just don't know what to make of Florida State. I lean Miami in that game. I think Miami has a lot more answered questions, but Florida State is a big unknown with new coordinators and new players at so many different positions. It's going to be hard to get a sense of what Florida State is going into the season. They'll get that bye on October 11th, and then here's what they'll play: a gauntlet, just a long gauntlet of difficult games. They'll have Louisville at home, Stanford at home before heading to SMU. That's a tough two-game stretch with Stanford in the middle. I think they'll handle Stanford, but Louisville at home and then at SMU, tricky spots there. They'll get revenge opportunity on November 8th against Syracuse. That will be at Hard Rock Stadium. And then NC State comes to them on November 15th before finishing up with two games on the road at Virginia Tech and at Pittsburgh, both of which might be in weather. And we know when we see Miami go on the road late in November in cold weather environments, that's a tricky spot for the Hurricanes. But I think if you look at everything they have, all the teams they have, I feel pretty comfortable backing the Hurricanes this year. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get the show, whether it's on the podcast platform. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube page, just go ahead, subscribe to the ESPN College Football page, and all of our videos will just populate automatically for you at any point in the future. Keep checking in. We have great shows coming up, more rankings coming up. If you missed our top 10 defenses, you can re-watch that show or take a peek back. That was on Monday's show. And we have a lot more fun stuff coming up between now and when things get kicked off for Big 12 Media Days here 4 or 5 weeks from now. So for all of us here at ACF, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.